Hello everyone, my name is David. Today we are going to take a look at another real tale with you. Today's story is one about reincarnation. It tells of experts from America who came to India, researched this story, and certified that it indeed is a genuine case of reincarnation. The story takes place in a village called Sharifpura, in a place called Etawah in Uttar Pradesh. In this village lived a family of three, a husband, a wife, and their daughter. This family was poor, and the story is set in the 1970s. At that time, the village was very underdeveloped. There was no electricity, no water supply, no roads, no schools or colleges. The village was very backward, and in this poor family, a girl named Sumitra was born in 1968. Due to the lack of work opportunities in the village, the men used to go to other places to work. Sumitra's father also used to go to Delhi to work. But as Sumitra grew a little older, her mother passed away. Now her father had to take care of the household and also work in Delhi. Due to this, Sumitra's uncle took care of her. Sumitra's father worked far away from home in Delhi, and Sumitra lived at her uncle's house. When Sumitra turned 13, her family arranged her marriage. She was married to a boy named Jagdish, who also lived away from the village due to his job. He spent some time with Sumitra, but had to go back to the city to earn a living and support the household. Even after marriage, Sumitra was alone. She had been away from her parents during childhood, and after marriage, her husband was also not around much, as he had to work to support the family. Sumitra's in-laws lived with her, but she weren't very close to them. In 1984, Sumitra gave birth to a son for the first time. At that moment, she felt like someone had finally entered her life who would never leave her, who would always be there for her, someone she could talk to whenever she wanted and play with. With the arrival of her son, Sumitra began to feel happy and would hold him close to her whenever she had free time. 5 months passed and her son was now 5 months old. One day, Sumitra, who didn't have access to a water source in the village, went to fetch water from a well. She would always take her son with her when she went to fetch water. In April 1985, Sumitra was returning home with her son after fetching water from the well. She had a water container in one hand and was holding her son with the other. Other people were also carrying water to their homes. Suddenly, a scream was heard, and when people turned around, they saw that Sumitra was standing still like a statue. The water container she was holding had fallen to the ground. Her son was beside her, and one of her hands was pointing towards the sky. Her eyes were rolling around in circles. People tried to call out to her, but Sumitra didn't respond. Seeing her strange condition, the onlookers were scared and kept their distance, unsure of what was happening. People were frightened because at that time there was a strong belief in spirits and ghosts. Sumitra's condition made them believe that something supernatural had happened. She was holding her son so tightly that he started crying. For about 5 minutes, everyone just stood there watching her. But after those 5 minutes, Sumitra's hand, which was pointing towards the sky, dropped down. She heard her son crying, looked at him, and asked why he was crying. Then she noticed the water container on the ground, realized it had spilled, and picked it up. When she looked around, she saw that the villagers were staring at her strangely. She asked them why they were looking at her like that, but they, frightened, didn't tell her anything and just said it was nothing. However, Sumitra felt that something had definitely happened, which made them look at her in such a peculiar way. But she had no idea what had happened to her. Her baby was crying, so she quickly soothed him, picked up the water pot, refilled it, and hurried back home. However, even after reaching home, she felt like something was wrong, but the villagers weren't saying anything to her. Something had definitely happened. 3 or 4 days passed, and one day Sumitra was cooking in her kitchen when her mother-in-law suddenly heard the sound of utensils clattering. She quickly going in the kitchen and saw Sumitra stood there like a statue. like what had happened to her a few days ago was happening again. But this time her both hands was raised upwards. Now both of her hands were in the air because she wasn't holding her baby, who was sleeping inside. She was breathing heavily, and her eyes were rolling around. Seeing this, her mother-in-law got very scared and tried to call out to Sumitra repeatedly, but Sumitra couldn't hear her. Hearing the noise, her father-in-law also came, along with some neighbors. This went on for about 10 minutes, with everyone calling out to her, but she wasn't responding. After 10 minutes, her hands dropped down, and she regained consciousness. She quickly covered her head with her veil because she used to keep it covered in front of her father-in-law and mother-in-law. When asked what had happened, her mother-in-law said, "Did something happen to you?" Sumitra replied, "No, nothing happened to me." Her mother-in-law was very frightened after seeing her like that. Sumitra then picked up her children, and her mother-in-law told her son everything. Her son also came back home. Sumitra was fine for a few days, but after some time she started behaving the same way again, which surprised everyone. When her husband saw her in such a condition, he became very worried and wondered what was happening to her. There was no hospital in the village, only a traditional healer, Vaid. They decided to take her to the Vaid. Then the village called a Vaid, traditional healer, who checked Sumitra and said she was perfectly fine, with no illness of any kind. For the next month, this cycle continued. Sumitra would have seizures, and when she recovered, she had no memory of what had happened to her. Sumitra's husband stopped going to the city because her parents insisted he stay home, fearing what might happen, especially since they had a small child at home. They worried that Sumitra might unintentionally harm the child, so she kept her distance from him, afraid that if she might hurt him because she had no control or memory of her actions during those times. As a result, their child mostly stayed with his grandmother. Then came the day of July 16, 1985. Everyone had finished their lunch, and Sumitra was playing with her son, holding him in her lap. She laid him down and stood up to leave, but suddenly she went into another seizure. Her hands twisted upwards, her eyes rolled back, and she started breathing rapidly. She tried to speak but couldn't. The family and neighbors were aware of her condition by now, and they didn't react much since she hadn't harmed anyone before. However, that day something unusual happened. Sumitra spoke a single sentence that shocked and frightened everyone. She said, "Exactly 3 days from today, I will die." And then, after that, she became normal again. Later, her husband asked her if she remembered what she had said, but Sumitra said she didn't remember anything. So her husband told her what she had said, and she was surprised to learn that she had said she would die in 3 days. The day she had her incomplete vision was July 16th, and she spent July 17th and 18th in good health, working perfectly and doing everything normally. Now it was July 19th, and the morning passed by peacefully, and so did the afternoon. She kept her children a little distance from herself, only picking them up occasionally. Otherwise, her child stayed with his grandmother. On July 19th, Sumitra decided that she would avoid doing anything that could lead to her death. She didn't go to the jungle, avoided heights. She stayed away from anything dangerous, like working near the stove, just in case something might happen to her. The afternoon turned to evening, and Sumitra was lying in her room, perfectly fine. Suddenly she felt suffocated, so she got up and went outside. As she stepped outside, she saw her friend passing by. She called out to her friend and started talking to her. They walked a little ahead and stood together, chatting. Her friend asked if she was all right because she knew about Sumitra's condition. Sumitra said she was completely fine and very happy after her son was born. She insisted that nothing was wrong with her. But suddenly, while they were talking, both of Sumitra's hands raised up. But unlike before, this time she stood perfectly straight. Her eyes weren't rolling, and she wasn't breathing heavily. Then Sumitra's family members came out, and so did the neighbors. They all saw Sumitra standing there like a statue. Her family tried hard to shake her, but Sumitra didn't move at all. She was then taken inside the house and laid down, and a doctor was called. He informed the family that Sumitra was no longer alive and that she had passed away. This news quickly spread throughout the village, and people started gathering in front of Sumitra's house. Families with children began warning them not to step outside, fearing that a similar misfortune might befall someone else. The villagers then suggested to Sumitra's family that her last rites be performed as soon as possible. The women of the village were called to prepare Sumitra for the funeral, as she had been a married woman. All the preparations for her final rites were made, and 45 minutes passed in this process. Suddenly, from the room where Sumitra's body was lying, a woman screamed loudly. Hearing this, everyone turned to look. Shortly after, another woman screamed and came running out of the room. The people asked the first woman who came out what had happened. She tried to calm herself down and explained that Sumitra had suddenly opened her eyes and they were moving around wildly. People dismissed it as her imagination, but then the second woman insisted that Sumitra's heart was beating rapidly. A third woman then confirmed that Sumitra's teeth were also chattering. After hearing all this, Sumitra's family called doctor. When doctor arrived at the house, he saw Sumitra and said that Sumitra was alive. Upon hearing this, everyone was shocked and scared. Sumitra's husband began to cry tears of joy, as did the rest of the family. The neighbors were also happy to know that Sumitra was alive. A little while later, when Sumitra regained consciousness, she saw some women applying oil on her and some women taking care of her. She asked the women around her, "What are you doing to me? What's happening?" As soon as Sumitra's voice was heard, her husband quickly came into the room, hugged her and said, "Sumitra, Sumitra." But as soon as her husband hugged her, she pushed him away and said, "Who are you? Why are you hugging me? I don't know you." Then her in-laws also entered the room. Her husband said, "These are my parents." But Sumitra replied, "No, I don't know them." Then her friend was called and they asked, "This is your friend?" But she said, "I don't know her." Sumitra's son was brought in front of her and her husband said, "This is our son. You love him more than your own life." But Sumitra said, "I don't know him either." Everyone was shocked, as Sumitra used to love her son more than her own life and always kept him close. How could she say that she didn't know him? Doctor was called again, and people said that Sumitra was not recognizing anyone. But doctor said, "Don't worry, she will be fine. This might be due to some shock or something else. She will gradually recover on her own." Sumitra, in the same manner, neither picks up her son, nor looks at him, nor does she talk to her husband or her in-law. She doesn't let anyone come near her, so her family started thinking that perhaps something had affected her mind, and that she might gradually get better. 3 months passed by with no improvement. Sumitra wouldn't talk to anyone or go near anyone. And one thing Sumitra consistently did was write a letter, asking for it to be mailed. Her husband was illiterate and Sumitra wasn't very educated either, so her family wondered what she could possibly be writing in these letters. They knew that she had stayed at her uncle's house and had learned a bit during that time, but they dismissed it, thinking she was just writing something trivial. When Sumitra would give her husband the letter, he would drop it in the village's postbox. This continued for 3 months. Then, one day, a man came in the village and started asking around if there was a woman in the village whose behavior was a bit odd, someone who was forgetting things quickly and doing strange things that were surprising others. When people heard this, they thought he must be talking about Sumitra, as she had become quite the topic of discussion in the village, and perhaps people from other villages had also heard about her. They took the man to Sumitra's house, where her husband came outside. The man asked him the same questions, and the husband asked how he knew about Sumitra. The man said that he just found out and asked if she really lived there. The husband confirmed that she did. Then the man introduced himself, saying, My name is Ramsiya Tripathi, and I've come from a village near Etawah. I am a professor at a college, and for the past 3 months I have been receiving letters. Initially, I ignored them, but when I finally read one, I felt that I should go and check out the place mentioned in it. Sumitra's husband asked, "Who is sending you these letters?" The man replied, "That's what I've come to find out. Is there a woman here who forgets things easily?" Sumitra's husband then asked again, "May I know your name?" The man replied, "My name is Ramsiya Tripathi." As soon as he said his name, Sumitra, who was sitting inside the room, quickly ran outside. The moment she saw Ramsiya Tripathi in front of her, she hugged him tightly. Everyone was shocked by Sumitra's reaction, and she began crying loudly while holding him. Tripathi tried to free himself from her grip, but Sumitra wouldn't let go. After a while, Sumitra finally released him. Ramsiya Tripathi then calmly asked, "I don't know you. What are you doing?" Sumitra replied, "Papa, I am your daughter." Everyone was even more shocked upon hearing this. Ramsiya said, "My daughter doesn't look like you." She responded, "No, I am your daughter. I am not Sumitra. My name is Shiva." Interestingly, Ramsiya Tripathi's daughter's name was also Shiva. Ramsiya Tripathi then sat down with everyone and placed a briefcase on the table. He asked Sumitra, "Were you the one sending me the letters?" Sumitra replied, "Yes, Papa, I was sending you the letters. Didn't you recognize my handwriting?" After thinking carefully, Ramsiya Tripathi realized that except for a few things, the handwriting in the letters was indeed the same as Shiva's. Ramsiya Tripathi said, "All right, if you are truly saying that you are my daughter, I want to ask you something, and you must answer truthfully." Sumitra agreed, so Ramsiya Tripathi took out an album from his briefcase, placed it in front of her, and asked her to tell him about the people in the album. It was an album of Shiva's wedding. As Sumitra looked at it, she began identifying the people. "This is my father," she said, pointing to a woman. "This is my mother," she continued. Then she identified a photo saying, "This is my brother," and another man in a photo as her husband and her in-laws. When she saw a picture with 2 children, she said, "These are my sons." Finally, she hesitated and pointed to a woman's photo, looking scared. Ramsiya Tripathi asked, "Why are you silent now? Who is this?" Sumitra replied, "This is my sister-in-law who killed me with a stone hit on my head on July 19, 1985. After Sumitra described everyone, Ramsiya Tripathi stood up, embraced her, and cried out loudly, "You are indeed my daughter, and everything you said is the truth." Meanwhile, Sumitra's family was shocked and couldn't believe she was Sumitra or Shiva. Ramsiya Tripathi then recounted the story. In 1962, his daughter was born, who grew up and went through graduation, studied at college, and became a professor. She married Shetty Lal, and within 5 years they had 2 sons. However, her married life was troubled. Shiva was well educated, while her in-laws had only completed 10th and 12th grades. They envied her education and wealth, constantly demanding money from her, driven by greed. One day, a dispute occurred in the family, and Shiva's in-laws called her family to say she had committed suicide and that her body was found on the railway track. When her family arrived, they found her body on the tracks, but there were no signs of it being hit by a train. Instead, there was a severe blow to her head. At that time, Shiva's father was away from the city. Her in-laws claimed that the dispute led to her suicide. Since no one had enough knowledge to investigate further, Shiva's body was quickly cremated without her father's presence. Shiva died on July 18th, and Sumitra predicted her death on July 19th. Shiva's family, suspecting foul play, conducted an investigation and discovered that Shiva's in-laws were seen at the railway station on the night of July 18th. The police filed a report, leading to the arrest of Shiva's husband and father-in-law. However, due to the lack of evidence, since the body had been cremated, no substantial proof was found, and they were released. Sumitra's family, wondering how Sumitra write a letter, who was not well educated and struggled with Hindi, was writing letters in English. Shiva told his father, "Dad, I will go with you," and then he took his daughter along with him. Once there, she met his sons, and since she had left her in-law and her husband due to the mistreatment and violence they had inflicted on her, she had no relationship with them anymore. In her mind, she considered Jagdish to be a very good person, even though he was poor. Jagdish was very kind and loyal, and he loved Sumitra deeply. Shiva decided to stay with Jagdish, made him his husband, and accepted Sumitra's 5-month-old son as her own. She settled in the same village with both her sons and lived happily, as did the entire village and their families. When this story reached the media and made its way to the US, reincarnation experts from America came to India to research the story. They declared it to be possibly the world's only genuine case of reincarnation with true authenticity. So, this was today's story. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. We hope you enjoyed the content and found it valuable.